in a world where blizzards could erase entire landscapes overnight, where the horizon vanished beneath whiteout skies and the cold could splinter steel like glass. The Cold War pushed human engineering into places it had never gone before. Soldiers, scientists, and field engineers were tasked with building secret outposts in the most unforgiving environments on Earth. Tiny lifeboats of warmth and structure surrounded by an ocean of ice. These shelters had to survive months without sunlight, without resupply, and often without the luxury of heated machinery or functioning generators. And in those brutal conditions, most designs failed. Metal warped under thermal stress, concrete cracked from expanding frost, and ventilation systems froze shut, suffocating the very people they were meant to protect. But among the ruins and abandoned stations, buried in drifts, one design stood apart. While other bases collapsed or disappeared beneath shifting dunes of snow, this shelter endured untouched for decades, its beams solid, its supplies preserved, its shape naturally strengthened by the very elements that destroyed everything around it. The secret wasn't brute force or exotic materials. It was a philosophy. Don't fight the Arctic, become part of it. During the height of the Cold War, both the United States and the Soviet Union looked to the polar regions not as wastelands, but as strategic corridors. The Arctic was a direct flight path for bombers and missiles, a silent frontier where early warning stations could mean the difference between detection and devastation. And so began a race to build radar sites, signal posts, remote weather stations, tiny outposts scattered across Alaska, Greenland, and Siberia. The United States constructed the vast Dew Line, and Soviet engineers mirrored the effort across their own frozen expanse. But the real enemy was never each other, it was the climate itself. Winds strong enough to tear metal roofs from their bolts, temperatures that plunged to -50, snow that drifted, shifted, buried, and suffocated anything that dared rise above the surface. Early shelters attempted to resist nature with thicker steel, reinforced walls, and more powerful generators, but the Arctic punished arrogance. Every added pound of material became another point of failure. So a small team of Soviet engineers stationed on the remote Taimyr Peninsula tried something different, something almost subversive in its simplicity. Don't battle the snow, use it. Instead of designing a shelter that stood proud above the tundra, they built into it, half burying the structure within a natural slope. Timber frames, corrugated steel, and earth formed the core, and then they allowed the drifting snow to do what it always did: pile up, day after day, storm after storm. The snow settled, hardened, and compacted over the structure. Where other shelters were crushed or frozen, this one grew stronger. Snow, when packed tightly, becomes one of nature's greatest insulators. Beneath even a few feet of it, temperatures hover near freezing, a life-saving contrast when the outside air can drop 60 degrees lower. Inside the buried shelter, engineers added one more piece of brilliance: a passive ventilation system with 2 vents of different heights, topped with simple wind caps. No motors, no heaters, nothing that could fail. Arctic winds pushed fresh air in through the lower pipe and pulled warm air out through the higher one, creating a natural, self-regulating airflow. Even during full blizzards, the warm air rising from the shelter melted small pockets around the vents, keeping them open. It was elegant, silent, foolproof. When the shelter was rediscovered more than 30 years later, it was still structurally sound. Supplies, inside wood, tools, even old canned food remained, preserved as though time itself had been slowed by the frost. What made this design so enduring wasn't technology, it was harmony. The builders understood that in extreme cold, heat isn't just lost through thin walls or open doors, but through conduction, convection, radiation, and the tiny cracks where warm air escapes. They knew metal becomes brittle, moisture freezes into frost that damages walls, and airtight structures become ice, so they used snow for insulation, wood for flexibility, and airflow for stability. Their choices echoed the techniques of indigenous Arctic peoples who built igloos and sod houses that breathed instead of blistering under stress. The same principles apply today. For survivalists, homesteaders, or anyone preparing for cold climates, the lessons are timeless. Build with the land, not on top of it. Use slopes and hollows to shield your shelter from wind. Let snow become an insulating blanket rather than an enemy to constantly shovel away. Maintain ventilation with one high outlet and one low intake so warm air can rise naturally and pull oxygen into the space without losing precious heat. Combine layered materials, wood, soil, sand, or sawdust to buffer temperature changes and prevent moisture from freezing into destructive ice. And above all, remember that a truly resilient shelter doesn't demand constant electricity, fuel, or maintenance. It sustains itself because it fits the environment around it. When researchers returned to the site decades later, many were astonished. Wooden beams remained strong, air shafts were clear, supplies were untouched. The snow that was once viewed as a threat had become a protective shell, preserving everything inside. In an era defined by nuclear brinkmanship and technological escalation, this quiet, buried structure offered a different kind of revelation. Survival comes not from overpowering nature, but adapting to it. The shelter that defied Arctic blizzards is more than a Cold War artifact. It's a living lesson, a blueprint for anyone designing off-grid cabins, winter shelters, emergency caches, or remote homestead structures. It shows how simplicity, balance, and intelligent use of natural forces can create buildings that endure far longer than expected structures that don't fight the environment, but thrive within it. So when you look out at a winter landscape or think about building something meant to endure harsh conditions, remember that some of the best survival secrets were discovered by accident, perfected by necessity, and buried beneath the snow long before we were born. And if this deep dive into forgotten Cold War ingenuity inspires you, share it with others who appreciate the art of building things at last, because these lessons aren't just history. They're a guide for enduring whatever storms the future may bring.